It's 4 o'clock. Welcome to the August 29th meeting of the Civic Works Committee. I'll call the meeting to order and look to my colleagues for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. I do not have a pecuniary interest, but I did want to comment on item number 3. One of the streets is the street that I live on for the decreased speed limit, and I did consult with the Integrity Commissioner, who advised me it is not a pecuniary interest. So knowing that people know where I live and I'll be voting on something that impacts my own street, I wanted it noted that I did advise and it is not an interest.
Thank you very much. All right. I've polled the members, and there's been a request to pull number 4 and 5. Are there any others? I'm also going to ask that we just change the order a little bit. There's an added item, and let's put that in with the remaining consent items, and that will allow a couple of our staff to be on their way prior to the schedule item, which involves a staff presentation that might take some time. So if you're interested in discussing the added item, then you might pull that as well. So I'll ask again if there's any other items that our members or our guests would like to pull. Welcome, Councillor Helmer and Councillor Usher. Okay, so at this point, I'll ask the clerks to prepare a motion for 2 to 4, 6 to 13, and our added item, which is number 16. Okay, yes, I'm sorry, 2 to 3. So that's been moved by Councillor Armstrong. Looking for a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Squire. Are there any comments on some of these items? All right, I'll go to Councillor Helmer and then Councillor Usher.
Thank you. I support all the recommendations, so I didn't want to pull any of those items, but I did want to make a couple of comments on number 10, the turbo blowers. I'm not sure, this might be my most favorite project that we're undertaking. The return on investment is obviously extremely fast. We're talking about 1 year and we'll have this money back. I think that the approach that our staff undertaken is really great. I think these kind of improvements, it's identified in the report that this is like a huge generator and requirement for electricity, and I just wanted to point it out because it's one of these really boring projects that saves a lot of money in the long run. Unfortunately, we don't spend a lot of time discussing them because nobody's against them because they're great projects. And I did want to just comment on that because I think our staff at the wastewater treatment area, and especially at the plant, I just want to recognize Mr. Gold and his whole team. They're just doing great work on that front. So that's my first comment on number 10. On number 12, I think there's a lot of interesting material in there about the community energy use and greenhouse gas inventory. I'm very interested to see that the very sharp increase in the number of registered vehicles, all the way up to 264,000. That's a very quick increase from the 2011 numbers. Keeping in mind that the cost of a personal vehicle is somewhere in the neighborhood of, and I'm talking insurance, depreciation, gas, all that stuff you need for a vehicle, it's around $9,000 a year. That's like $2.4 billion a year being spent by private individuals and organizations that own fleet vehicles. That's a lot of money. And, that's one of the things we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the transportation system is the very significant private costs of having to own one or more cars as your way of getting around the city of London. I'm really glad to see that on the emissions side, we're tracking under the provincial and federal targets. That's not true of all communities. I'm glad to see that we're under that line and the trend line is going pretty well. You can see the 2030 target. That's obviously a very aggressive target, and it will be hard to get there, but we seem to be on the right track, and I just wanted to say that. I think this report is a very useful one for the community.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
So on the same report that my colleague mentions, it is really interesting that one of the things is London is spending less money on energy. I don't know, but it sure doesn't feel that way. And are we as a municipality spending less money on energy? Like, are our electric bills going down? And I know I will speak for the convention center, of which I sit on their board, and I gotta tell you, it ain't going down. It's going up, and it's going up substantially. So can anyone give me just a little bit of, I'm not poking at a provincial political issue here, but it just doesn't feel like anyone's spending less money on energy.
Through the chair, a number of the items in the report are dealing with avoided cost from our baseline, and those are trajectories. If changes weren't put in place to reduce your energy consumption, you would then have the additional cost tacked on to your additional energy use. So in many cases, what we're reporting, as the report notes, are avoided cost. So if you hadn't made your change, you would be paying a whole lot more. So in 2016, for example, the number was roughly $100 million that residents would be paying more if they hadn't put in place changes based on current energy prices.
Okay, so this is, and I did read the avoided energy costs. So we're in pain, it would just be worse pain, would be one way of putting it. But I think the tag in the report that says London is spending less money makes it sound like, you know, I was spending $100 on energy and now I'm spending $70 on energy versus I'm still spending $100 on energy, but it might have been $140 on energy. Maybe it's a fine line, but it feels a little disingenuous in terms of what we're expressing here. So I think the tagline should be, Londoners have avoided spending more money on energy. Is probably more accurate than that. So we just have to be a little careful on that. I get where you're coming from, but I just kind of read it and says, it just doesn't feel that way to me. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for allowing me to speak at your meeting. I know that you could charge me for it, but you won't. I'm just kidding. Two concerns I have, and it's to do with item number 3, by the way. And it's to do with these areas that we're reducing the speed to 40 kilometers per hour. Now, I personally don't have anything against it, but in these areas, I wonder if staff could help me understand how we are going to do this, because Delaney, I understand why we want it on Delaney. It's a school zone. And Nixon and Ernest Avenue. These are specific streets which I'm glad to see that we're doing it on. I just don't know how we're going to change people from driving at 80 kilometers per hour as they do today, which they should not, to 40 kilometers per hour. Because these are busy streets, and you have Nixon from, I lost my spot there, from Ferndale down to Alston, almost to Southdale, and then you have Ernest from Rosamond to Patience at 40 kilometers per hour. Again, I say that I'm not against this because that whole area, I'm having a meeting with staff about this, I think it's day after tomorrow, but that whole area I get complaints almost on an hourly basis about speeding. I just don't know how we are going to enforce 40 kilometers per hour. Can you help me? Through you to staff.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And I do know that we have one of these sections in my neighborhood, and we're doing a test with the signs that are put in the middle of the road as bollards, and perhaps staff can let us know how that test is going. So I'll pass this on to staff, but not before I say thank you for some enhanced graphics here in our report. The graphics for the various roads are much bigger, easier to see, so it's very, very clear where we're talking about. But the councillor is looking for ways to reduce the speed limit when we say it's 40 kilometers an hour. Apparently, passing Patience Crescent isn't enough to have people slow down a bit. So let's go to staff.
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillor. I will point out the existing speed limit is 50 kilometers an hour on those roadways, and what we're doing is reducing it to 40. In terms of how we're actually going to change people's behaviors, this is one tool in a toolbox. You know, we have many tools that we can utilize, and as per the policy, we're trying to achieve our goals that we've stated underneath Vision Zero, and lowering the speed limits along these school areas is one of them. Creating traffic calming along certain corridors is one of them. But I'm going to go back to the overall vision. It's about engineering, it's about education, and it's about enforcement as well. So in terms of how we're going to achieve the 40, if there is a problematic area, specifically say along Nixon or Delaney, we'll have to ensure that we have appropriate enforcement out there to help change the behavior and the culture of those drivers as they go by those school zones, and particularly in the times when there is students being dropped off in those areas. So it's one tool in the toolbox that we utilize to change the overall behavior of drivers along these areas and hopefully reduce overall speed limits, that people are driving at.
Councillor.
Thank you, and I do respect and appreciate that. I know that this is what we're trying to do. All I'm asking is how are we going to do it? Because putting up the sign is not going to be enough. I know that it's 50. I'm saying that people drive 80 today, and I'm saying that they do that illegally. So bring it down from the legislative speed of 50 to 40 is not going to be enough to just put the signs up. They already break the 50 kilometers and they drive anywhere from 60 to 80. I know I live in a neighborhood. What the folks want to know is how we're going to do it. Just putting up the sign is not enough. I'm not going to stand up in the middle of Nixon Street and say, slow down, slow down. I mean, it's an alternative. Ed and I can do that easily, but we don't want to get ourselves killed. So maybe we don't have an answer today. The chair referred to some signs that we have on Jalna right in the middle of the road that says slow down or something like that through certain areas. Even that, it helps, but it doesn't work 100%. So all I'm asking is, maybe we don't have an answer right now, and that's okay, because maybe this is just where we're starting. But I want to be sure that at some point in time, we're going to have something that will force the people to drive at 40 kilometers per hour. Like Mr. Solder said, these are school zones also. So, you know, maybe we don't have an answer. I'm looking for something more than what Mr. Solder just told us, really. Thank you.
Thanks to the chair, to the councillor. It's not one measure that will slow people down. It's really about making sure that we design the roadways in a manner that they drive the appropriate speed limit. From an engineering perspective, it's about educating the public. So we have a public education campaign underway right now that's related to speeding, as well as a number of other initiatives. And it's about, end of the day, also utilizing enforcement. So we'll have to send out the police to ensure that in some of these areas that we do spot enforcement. So there's no one tool. It's a combination of tools between engineering, enforcement, and education that will actually help reduce the speed of the drivers on these roadways.
Thank you. And of course, we do traffic studies as well to figure out exactly how fast drivers are going, because there's often a perception when you're standing at the side of the road, especially depending how close you are to the car, that it is can be going faster than you may perceive it going faster than it is. Councillor Squire.
One of the things I love about council is that sometimes we have short memories, and I remember this well coming forward, the matter of speed limits in school zones, and my recollection is this was initiated by us. We brought it forward initially, and Mr. Soldo and his people came back with a report and said, yeah, it's one thing that may help a little, but there's a lot of other things that need to be done to do that. So I'm not sure we should be looking to staff to provide an answer to a question that we asked ourselves. And quite frankly, that doesn't have an easy answer. And I'm always amazed when we sit here that we never look at the people who are speeding. We're always going, you know, we've got to get better enforcement out there. We've got to do this. We've got to do that. Well, what about the people who are driving the cars, obeying the law? I mean, I would think that would be pretty much of a good start, because if we start taking every piece of human behavior and start saying, well, we've got to get enforcement out there to stop them doing it, we're not going to have money for the essentials. But I really think this is an issue that Mr. Soldo's spot on, that there's other things that have to be done, including personal restraint. And I think this started with us. We were the ones who sort of wanted the school zones, speed limits.
Thank you. If I may ask a couple questions to the chair, just perhaps how our little tests with those bollards, what exactly do we call those? So in some school zones, I've got some on Tweedsmuir and some on Montebello, and they say this is school zone. But those seem to be working. I know when I drive toward those and I see them as an obstacle, I would just naturally slow down. I'm wondering if we're finding that's the effect that it has on most drivers.
Quick point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm just not sure that we're actually still talking about the reports that are in front of us right now. I don't know if you want to raise that under new business or...
Well, you know, thank you, Councillor. I've actually written it down in my, here as a point of new business. So happy to move along if you're more comfortable doing that. So if there's no more comments on these items, perhaps I'll just welcome Councillor Hopkins. You're welcome. Was there an item that you were, okay. Thank you very much. So we've got these items moved and seconded. I'll call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
That takes us to item number 4 on the consent items, and I'll look to Councillor Squire.
I probably could have got away without pulling this, since I'm going to be in support of the recommendation, but I couldn't let this go by without recognizing the important addition to the Thames Valley Parkway. And I'm really pleased that we're looking at this being completed, and it's really going to open up a whole area of the city to the Thames Valley Parkway. And I also know that it wasn't as easy as it might have been. Some of the landowners, certainly in Ward 6, didn't have the opportunity or the ability to provide land to complete the parkway, so we had to do the crosses across the river. But I don't think we can overestimate the importance of this, Mr. Chair. It connects so many areas of the city to downtown by these pathways, and we should be very proud of that. And I want to thank staff. Mr. McPherson, I know, is up there, and he does a lot of work in these areas. So congratulations, and this is really important.
Yes, thank you very much. So this is absolutely a gem. I know people new to London are kind of amazed at how far they can travel, and we've done work on it consistently. We're redoing near Meadow Lily. We're crossing the tracks at Kinsman. So it just gets better and better. At that, shall we? I see we've got a mover and a seconder. Any other comments, Deputy Mayor Hubert?
I think we also need to continue to promote this. You know, we do this good work, and this is the, you know, it's Civic Works, it's the nuts and bolts committee, but there's a whole side of it that, you know, I'll give you just a quick comment that my next door neighbor, he and his wife bike, and they're heading into their retirement years, and he actually was talking about this area. He says, I've never gone over there before. Do you realize what's in this city? And he was so excited about what he had discovered in our city, and somehow we have to move past the nuts and bolts and help people to discover what's really there. I was down Westminster Ponds behind Parkwood Gardens down where Reforest London is and looking at some of that. It's like, you know, it's a pretty hidden gem down here. So we need to continue to move past, sorry, with due respect to 18,000 engineers in the room, to pass the nuts and bolts to helping people discover what's already here.
Thank you. So let's call that question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
That brings us to item number 5, the contract award tender for Blackfriars Bridge rehabilitation. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Obviously, this reminds me a little bit of the situation we ran into with the normal school, where we provided a number, or committee was under the impression a certain number was going to be required to deal with a heritage asset, and then the number became much higher. And I'm just wondering if staff can help me out. It would be much more helpful and better if we were conservative on our initial number and said, look, we either can't be terribly accurate, or we're going to get a number first and then come to you, because I think it creates an issue with the public when they feel that for some reason we've increased the cost of something exponentially, when in fact the cost all along may have been that. In other words, the increase in cost didn't come about because somebody did something wrong or anything like that. So I just wonder if you can answer that question. In other words, is there a better way to do this?
Thank you, and through the chair, I think that's good advice, particularly where we're dealing with unique assets that aren't subject to the usual formula we use to estimate the replacement of conventional water line or repaving of a residential street. So in the future, we'll take a look at these sorts of assets and provide a range where we think we would see an acceptable estimate fall. Because as you're quite right, the number has been this number all along. We just didn't have all the information earlier on, and the knowledge that's required to come up with that number is quite specialized and needed that contractor input. So there are also ways to engage that earlier in procurement as well.
Councillor.
Thank you very much for that. Now, on the issue, I will be supporting this. I think, first of all, it's very hard not to support something where your 91-year-old mother has a picture of this on the wall in her living room. You know, it's really hard to say, you know what, Mom, that picture with Blackfriars Bridge, you may want to take that down or change it. But I think it's an iconic asset. There's absolutely no question about that Blackfriars Bridge is an iconic asset. And I think this really demonstrates that the only people who can do this on assets like this it's us, it's the City of London. And we have to make that investment like we did in the normal school and make it in Blackfriars Bridge, because London, frankly, would not be the same without the Blackfriars Bridge. And so that being said, I think it's a lesson for all of us and demonstrates that in the future, we're going to have to do heritage better, whether it's not necessarily a bridge or the normal school, but something else. We're either going to have to put money aside to deal with these assets and keep them in good shape, because this process that we go through where a private individual buys a heritage asset and then doesn't have the money to fix it up, and we tend to place blame on them because they can't do that economically, I think that has to change somehow, and I think it's something maybe not this council, but the next council will want to have a real hard look at, because having been on planning, I know the passion that goes into heritage and how many developers I've seen say, I would have loved to preserve this asset, but we just can't. We don't have the money to do that. So those are my thoughts, but I think in this case, we have to support this.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
So I'm just curious, how do they lift the bridge off? Like, is it a craned off, or is it you know, it's not, do we take it apart like a Tinker Toy, or what do we do here? Or not like Tinker Toy, more like Mechanosat.
Through the chair to the councillor, very carefully. So this is a bridge that's been around for a long time. We'll have to make sure that it's properly braced, and then it's going to have to be lifted off to do the actual work on it. So, you know, getting back to the earlier question, there's a lot that really goes into fixing a bridge like this, and a lot of parts that are deteriorated to a certain point. So this is all going to be very meticulously planned out in terms of lifting it off, And I'm sure it'll be quite the media event in the community, taking the bridge off there, but we are putting our best foot forward and making sure that this goes off without a hitch.
So I'm so glad that you got to my second point as part of your comments, was I think this is a media event. So I think, I'm so glad we're going to keep you busy, Rob. You know, are we doing like I mean, it's a cool time-lapse photography type of project, or time-lapse video, or whatever it happens to be. I was thinking about the event we had when we got rid of the old VIA station. And, you know, we imploded that thing, and how just, you know, that was cool. I mean, if you like blowing things up, that was really cool. So how can we do that? How can we do it in such a way, not just because it's a cool engineering feat, and, you know, it's fascinating. I mean, as someone who moved to the oldest wide board wood building in the city, it's really cool. But how do we do it in such a way that we're educating people about the importance of heritage, the importance of that neighborhood, the why and the wherefores of it, and all that sort of thing? Because it ties in with my colleagues' comments about investment. So if we're going to invest in it, let's not just invest in, once again, the nuts and the bolts, and this really is a lot of nuts and a lot of bolts, but also in the memory, the intellectual or knowledge base of the city, of both the older generation but the younger generation as well.
Through the chair to the councillor, I'll use a parallel example. Currently, we're underway the CP grade crossing on Warncliffe, north of Oxford. There, we're also doing video and photography in terms of documentation. So we'll be doing the same thing here. We'll be most likely using drone technology to take video of it as we're taking it off, and doing some chronological photography in terms of documenting how we're doing it. So there's been a lot of thought given to this in terms of when we do the actual work, and we'll be we can definitely come back to council with more of a detailed plan so you have a better understanding as we move forward.
Through the chair, if I may just add to that, we've also entertained a request from the Blackfriars community around a bye-bye bridge party of some sort, to have some sort of event where they can say temporarily farewell to what's been an iconic part of their history for well over a century. So our friends in communications are working with us on some of those more community-based outreach so that people can have that emotional connection to the asset that served them well, and that actually under the increased price will now serve them for another 75 years versus 25. So with the price increase, we actually are buying more service life as well.
So a final comment, you know, Facebook and Instagram are absolutely wonderful in this sense, and they get such a buy-in, and it costs us very, very little. And I could see that I know that community fairly well, and they'll be all over it. And I think there's some real value there. So, and it's a lot of fun, you know.
Should we look through the stores to see if we've got any antique bridge out signs? I don't know. Councillor Armstrong.
All sounds like fun, but my concern is that you know, this is a project that we haven't done before, and there's been many projects in the city that we haven't done before, or were projects that, you know, in any event, things didn't go the way we expected them to go. Give you an example, Springbank Dam.
Thanks, Bill.
Another one, CN Tunnel under Egerton Street. You know, that was the first. We're gonna drill a tunnel through sand. Well, that didn't work out. Equipment got stuck. I don't know how many more years later. It was 10 years before it was finally completed. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, so these are wild guesstimates. Original cost was going to be $3 million, ended up being 11 or 13, 10 years later. You know, there's been the water reservoir cracked. the floor. I mean, the list goes on and on. Projects we thought would go problem-free, ended up, things went sideways. So this is a unique project that we've never done before. I don't know if it's been done anywhere before, probably somewhere. So I just want to make sure that we don't find ourselves where something unforeseen goes wrong, or there's a major, something unanticipated, and suddenly we're back here having a meeting about a bridge that's in the river, or a bridge that suddenly we're looking at many more millions of dollars because of an unforeseen circumstance or problem. I need some assurances that, you know, if this company is going to get the job done, that's the cost, no surprises, and that they know what they're doing. Because can you tell me, has this company ever moved a bridge before? And if not, are you sure that they're capable of doing this work? Through you to staff.
Thank you. And first, perhaps I'd ask staff to just describe for the people at home why we decided to move the bridge, so they understand the discussion a little better.
Sure. Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor. First of all, we have done this before. We fixed up King Street Bridge. We fixed up the Meadow Lily Bridge. What we haven't done before is take a bridge off its mooring, off its abutments. And that goes back to the chairman's question, why we're doing that. Because we cannot fix it in place. It is not possible to fix that bridge and replace some of the members with it standing where it is. It's not structurally sound. We're actually removing members that actually hold the bridge up. It has to be taken off its abutments, and it'll be done indoors. So in terms of a better quality bridge, at the end of the day, it will be a better quality than fixing it on site because it'll be done indoors. It'll allow for better quality control. Is there assurance that something cannot go wrong? I cannot give you that insurance because it's a bridge that's been there since 1875. But this contractor is one of the most qualified contractors to do this. They are a contractor that has worked on similar historical bridges in other areas. Have they taken other bridges off their abutments? I have to look into that. But it is very, as the councillor said, it's very unique. Not many bridges at this age actually come off their abutments and are done like this. But it's because of its age that we have to do it like this. We cannot fix it in place here today. But they're a very qualified contractor. We do have a contingency amount within this contract. And at this point, we believe that we have the sufficient funds to undertake this and deliver the bridge back into its original place in a much better benefit. And as the city engineer has said, the new bridge will last 75 years. That's our goal as we move forward.
Councillor.
Well, I'm good with the 75 years. I'm good with, you know, doing this. I've supported this restoration of this bridge. And I'm sure that they are a qualified company. I know they've done work before, but this is something different. So, and you have contingency money, and I understand that. So if something goes wrong, an unforeseen circumstance, the contingency money, that's the end of it. They have to finish the job no matter what the problems that may come up. That's it. We're not going to end up with a project that started with 3 million, ended up 11 or 13, whatever it was. We're not going to find ourselves in that situation. We've got that in writing because you said you don't know if they have ever done this type of work before. Yes, they probably have been involved in bridge restoration, and so have we. We do bridges all the time. I'm aware of that. But I just want to make sure that we're protected and that if they're going to take on the job, they say they can do the job. There's a price, and whatever it takes, they have to finish it from beginning to end, you know, no matter what comes up, and that the taxpayers aren't going to end up with a big surprise. So is that going to be in the contract?
through the chair to the councillor, the contractor is responsible for what they bid on in terms of the scope that we've put out there. If something unknown pops up as we move forward, we'll have to deal with it. So is this, if something unexpected comes up, that'll be above and beyond the scope of work that they bid on. And in terms of this contractor, in terms of what they have done in other places, I'm going to actually look to my staff in terms of providing maybe a bit of a background on this contractor and their qualifications. Carl.
Through the chair, this contractor was selected as part of a pre-qualification system where we brought in, opened it up to many contractors. And McLean Taylor did have very high scores as it came through in the pre-qualification. So they're one of 4 contractors that were pre-qualified, and they impressed us with the information they had. We have Dylan here for more specific questions if we head in that direction. Thank you.
I won't, you know, I guess the thing is, I don't want to find ourselves in one of these situations that have occurred in the past where things have gone sideways and the taxpayers are on the hook and the bridge is either in the water or out of the water, but something else has, you know, that we're dealing with the situation. How do we protect ourselves from these sort, you know, because if they've done their analysis, everybody's done their jobs, there shouldn't be any surprises. But things have gone sideways before and end up costing a lot more money and a lot more time. Time is not really a big issue here, but a lot more money, and we don't have a choice. So I just, through you, perhaps the city engineer, how do you make sure that something like that doesn't happen?
Thank you, Ms. Scher.
Thank you, and through the chair. In any construction contract, the amount of risk we're able to transfer to a contractor comes at a price. We can transfer almost all risk, but we're going to pay a great deal more for them to cover uncertainties. We believe we have a good scope here. It's been a lot of work going into evaluating it. There was a pre-qualification process and a competitive tender process. We're moving the bridge indoors, which allows us to control factors like environment, weather delay, wind issues, some of the other quality management issues that can introduce risk into construction. That said, there is no such thing as a contract without any risk unless we've chosen to pay to transfer all of that risk to our contractor. There is always some risk that there will be something that was missed that could require us to reevaluate in scope or out of scope relative to what we pay our contractor. We believe we have contingency available to manage that for this project, and we think that we've done our due diligence, and that's the best I can put in front of committee.
Okay, thank you very much. If that's the best answer, then I'll move on to Councillor Helmer.
So the project, I'm going to start with the positive. I think we should go ahead with the project, and I think the budget is quite reasonable. I'm glad Councillor Armstrong was asking about, you know, what if, and certainly it hasn't come up yet, but, you know, insurance is an important thing when you're managing risk, and, you know, the contractor's going to have to carry their own insurance. We've got our insurance, and I think that that's an important thing to remember. In terms of the project itself, this is going to take a long time. So it'll be about a year long. There's a section in the report that says there will be no pedestrian or cyclist detouring, like nothing planned across that span. And so that's quite a long time for cyclists to be finding alternate routes, and also pedestrians. And so I wonder what we expect to happen in terms of if there's no crossing at that place, where we expect pedestrians to go and cyclists to go, and whether we want to do anything in those alternate routes where we expect them to go, to make it a bit more easy for them to travel on those routes.
Thank you to the chair, to the councillor. In terms of the timeline itself, I'm going to run through a little bit of the timeline here. We expect the removal of the bridge this fall to go off-site for rehabilitation. It's going to be off-site during winter and spring of 2018. We were probably looking at putting the bridge back on site in the fall of 2018. So it'll be gone for about a year. It does remove a linkage between that neighborhood and the downtown. In terms of putting a linkage back, it's not a simple thing. We'd be talking about millions of dollars for a temporary bridge. So what we anticipate on doing is actually putting up detour signage like we do for any typical construction site. People would have to go and utilize either Oxford or Queen Street in terms of crossing the river at that location. Oxford is about a couple hundred meters north, and then Queens is a little bit further to the south. They are tied, the roadway is tied to the TVP, or basically on either side, and that does have linkages. Probably the greatest sort of risk area would be crossing across Oxford Street, that bridge there. But again, there is ample sidewalks along there for both cyclists and pedestrians to go across. So our goal is to provide guidance to both cyclists and pedestrians to utilize both of those routes to cross the river.
Thank you. And maybe a quick question for those imagining the removal of a bridge. Will it be disassembled and then reassembled, or we're going to move large pieces of it with cranes and truck those around? Perhaps that question, or do we know what the contractor has planned yet?
I think it's premature this time to come up with exactly how that scenario is going to work out. Anticipated the majority of the bridge comes off at once, and then it will be taken apart and sent to the indoor facility that they'll be utilizing. But it won't be taken apart in pieces, otherwise the potential there for it to fall down.
Thank you. Councillor Usher, you had a question. Oh, Councillor, I'm sorry. I saw some body language which made me think that you were done, but please continue.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer. I know that this project received it was appealed to the minister. There was a bit of a delay between when we completed the EA and when we're actually proceeding now. And I wonder to what extent the delay contributed to the increase in costs. I know we have a lot of pressure on a lot of bridge projects, and we're seeing increased prices for some things. Those are not the same as this bridge project, and I just wanted to check on this specific one, whether we really see an increase in terms of the actual delay in the project.
Through the chair to the councillor, it's hard to quantify what that delay has done in terms of cost, but I think it's very safe to say that a delay in this project has now moved the tendering of this project into a very busy timeframe in terms of construction season, the funding at the federal level that's out in terms of the entire country as well as the province. A lot more projects out there, a lot less contractor availability. So I would say it's very safe to say that there is some increase in this project related to the delay itself and the overall construction activity which we're experiencing right now.
Thank you. I think that's important and something for community members to keep in mind when they take advantage of the things that are available to them in terms of appealing decisions. Certainly that's something that they can do, and I would encourage people to do that when they think we're making the wrong decision. But there are costs sometimes to that. And you know, this one went to the minister, and the minister said, no, what they want to do is fine. It took a year for us to hear that, to find that out, and it cost us some money. It also meant that the bridge replacement didn't happen as fast as it could. On the positive side, it meant maybe we could get some PTIF funding through the federal government to cover some of the costs. And I do want to recognize that that's a contribution the federal government is making on this project. I think it's a great example of building those active transportation links for this sort of longer term future. And I'm done.
Thank you. Then I'll go to Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this is one of the reasons I came here, because I wanted to hear this discussion and this. I'm fascinated with it, and I'm very proud of what we're doing here. I think that this is one of a kind, indeed. I certainly accept that, and I really appreciate what Councillor Hubert was talking about, because I really believe that this is something that should be recorded for our generation, for the next generation, and for the world, because there are lots of people who will want to know how we did this, and a video of it will be excellent. So I appreciate it. I also want Councillor Armstrong to know that I respect where he is coming from, But, you know, we've done a lot of successful jobs here also. We've got good engineers in this city, both on our staff and out in the community. And I'm not going to go through all the successful jobs that we've done. Sure, some of them fell short of what we anticipated, but I do trust our staff that they're going to come through with this particular one. And I don't think that I want to start bringing up reasons why we should be concerned about this at this point in time, because I think that on the end, we're going to be proud of the job that will be done here, both us as city councillors and us as Londoners. So I just ask that the staff proceed as the report suggested. With respect to the cost, I agree with my colleagues. These type of projects, they're very, very difficult to estimate. Sometimes we estimate and we overestimate. Sometimes we underestimate. Sometimes we don't have all the facts. Sometimes as we go along, we find that there are things that we thought that we caught and we didn't catch it. I supervised some microwave towers up in the north end, 500 feet up in the air, and you know, they're just as delicate as building a bridge across the river here. And we did this with caution, and in some cases we overestimated, other cases we underestimated, but on the end, everything worked out quite fine, and I believe that it will be the same thing with this bridge. So I want to congratulate our staff, and I want to encourage them to move on, and you know, let's be proud of it at the end. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We certainly encounter unforeseen circumstances, but we definitely learn from them, and sometimes quite a bit. If I may, a question just from the chair. Since we've changed our approach and we're deciding to repair the bridge off-site, are there any opportunities that presents for us?
Through the chair, could I ask for a bit of clarification? Opportunities in terms of technical opportunities, or opportunities for people to become involved or see what we're doing behind closed doors? Oh,
I'm sorry. I was merely talking about technical opportunities, or can we do more with the bridge than we planned? I've had a couple of people write and ask those kinds of things, so I'll pass that on. Opportunities to come see it while it's being done. I didn't think of that at all. Maybe it would be a fun thing to do.
Thank you for the clarification. I believe Mr. Soldo has an answer for you.
Thank you, through the chair. In terms of opportunities, the rehabilitation being done off-site does provide us a lot of opportunities. It's first of all, it's a lot safer. You're not working outside on this bridge. In terms of public safety, there's an opportunity. We don't have a construction site where people are going by. Longer lifespan, which we'd indicated earlier on because of the fact we're able to do more with the bridge itself. And it's actually going to shorten the duration of this construction because we'll be doing the work during the winter, which we normally wouldn't be able to do because it's going to be indoors. So there's a lot of technical opportunities, I'll call them. And then if we were doing this bridge like we did the other two older bridges, we had to do the painting outside. Well, now you're actually going to be painting all the parts indoors, which provides a better quality and lasts longer. So maybe that's not exactly the type of opportunities you're looking for, but as an engineer, those are kind of technical opportunities that I would say are being done because we're taking the bridge off. It's more.
Thank you very much for that. So I'll look for someone to move the repair of the bridge and second that. One last glance to see if anybody has any further comments, and seeing none, let's call that question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
That brings us to the end of the consent items. So at this point, we'll move to scheduled items, which is a staff presentation on the One River Environmental Assessment Update. So we have a technical memorandum for stage 1, our work plan and community consultation plan. So I'll look to staff for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Ashley Ramelow, who's our Acting Division Manager of Stormwater Engineering and the Project Manager for One River. She's going to walk through a brief presentation outlining some of the technical considerations and the work plan and communication strategy that we're undertaking right now. You're going to be seeing a lot from us on this file in the next little while. We'll be back next month with the agency report, and we'll be back again later this year with recommendations related to Springbank. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ashley, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions after she's done.
Thank you. So like Kelly said, this is the first of many times you will be seeing us on this issue. Now, this is likely the least exciting of the reports that we will be bringing to you. There's nothing too earth-shattering tonight, but given the level of public interest in this project, we want to keep you really up to date on where we're at in the process, sort of what sort of things you can be expecting to hear from your constituents, and where we're going next. So tonight I'll just take you really briefly through our work to date, the technical memo and community consultation plan that were included with your reports, and the schedule of the next steps, what's going to be happening over the next couple of months. So in late July, we issued the notice of commencement of the environmental assessment, and we started our early public engagement. This was really to inform Londoners that this was happening and start getting them thinking about the One River Master Plan again and thinking about how they want to interact with the river. So we went out with pop-up events, which I'll go into more a little bit later in the results, and a survey, and really trying to get them involved. We started setting up our stakeholder meetings, which have begun, and we've been scheduling meetings with First Nations and Indigenous groups, which will be going forwards. We've also been working away at developing the evaluation criteria for the Springbank Dam alternatives. Again, I'll go into this a little bit more later on. And finalizing the Agency Advisory Committee report. So the first thing that we brought forwards to you with this report was the technical memorandum. This is really a work plan for the One River Master Plan, EA. This process is a little bit different from other EAs because of the initial step of evaluating Springbank Dam. We chose to do this, of course, because so much of the rest of the plan depends on knowing where those river levels are going to rest. So we have phase one, which of course is review of the background information, which we're well into. And it goes alongside phase two, stage one a little bit as well. There is some overlap there. So of course, phase two, stage one being the Springbank Dam alternatives, and phase two, stage two, which we'll move into towards the new year, which is the river management strategies and the remainder of the master plan EA. So this is taken from the technical memo. It's just to show the various stages a little bit more clearly. I know when I came into this, it was a little bit abstract until I got to this particular diagram, and it helped things make sense a little bit more as well. Just how we're going to move through. Should note that we do have some arrows there for council input and consultation. There's actually going to be a lot more of those arrows in there, but for clarity, they're in their general locations. Consultation, I've actually been stressing to people as we go forward and as we talk to people, will be throughout this process. We want to hear from people continuously. It's not a matter of you have a 30-day period to talk to us and after that the gate is closed. We want to hear from people as we go forward. So to take you briefly through the alternatives, of course, within the EA, we have a do-nothing alternative. Now, in this case, it's not a truly do nothing because we do have a large structure there that would have to have some maintenance over the years to ensure that it stays safe. Concrete does not just sit inert in a body of water and have nothing happen to it. But the dam would be left in roughly its existing condition. Then we have what people tend to think of the two alternatives as being the free-flowing river, so get rid of the dam, or reinstate the dam and have that retention function again. Free-flowing river, also that could be a wide range of aspects. So that could be that the structure is left mainly in place, perhaps the gates are removed from the bottom of the river, perhaps the dam is removed entirely. This option also includes some of those repurposing options that we would be looking at more. And that detail gets into once we select the big picture alternative. So as we move through this, we are looking into the evaluation criteria now. We're developing those right now with our consultant, CH2M. And it really falls into the main categories: natural environmental, the social cultural environment, which includes the feedback from our stakeholders and First Nations groups, and then the technical and economic. The second item that was appended to the report was the community consultation plan. So we've been really conscientious about getting out there and getting this information to the public that this is happening. We really want this to be an open, transparent process for the public. We didn't want this to take anybody by surprise when we get to the end of it, or we didn't want anybody to know, a week before, well, wait a second, they're going to make a decision on Springbank Dam. Well, we haven't heard anything about this. So that's why we started with those early consultation events, the pop-up events, just to create that awareness and to start getting feedback on how people currently use the river and how they want to use the river. The consultation plan also provides opportunities for stakeholder groups, the Indigenous and First Nations communities, to participate again throughout the process, not just in one small designated spot. It discusses, timely updates to council, and ensuring that the public and council have accurate data and are well informed when it comes time to make these decisions. So as outlined in that plan, our consultation approach is the pre-consultation and project launch, which we're well into, reports to Civic Works Committee and Council, such as this one. And then our public information centers, the first of which is scheduled for mid-October, which will be when we lay out those alternatives in more detail for the public, and the implications of some of each of those alternatives, some of the pros and cons, implications of cost, implications on the environment, and that will all be laid out for people to really mull over more. And then, of course, part of the process is the completion of the EA, which would be next year. At the following the development of the draft master plan, it becomes available for review as per all EAs, and a final consultation period or public comment period. So this was the fun we were having this summer. This was the pre-consultation. We actually had a really good time with some of these events. So we had pop-up events. So a big kudos to our consultant and our communication staff for pulling this together very quickly, so that we could take advantage of the summer festivals and the great weather and be able to talk to people across the city. So we had pop-up events in 2 of the parks where we were there for several hours and be able to talk to people who are actually using the park, but we want to make sure that we weren't talking to just people who are already down by the river. So we went to Inspiration Fest, we went to Forest Festival in Harris Park, we were at the Western Fair Farmers Market, and we went to Rib Fest, and we had great conversations at all of those. We had the survey that asked people, how do you use the river? How often do you visit? Who do you visit with? Some of the favorite activities to do down there. Incidentally, just as many people take their pets down as their children. And it was interesting, about 25% of respondents said that they take visitors there. So we'll have the full results of that survey available shortly. But those are just some of the highlights that were made known to us by our consultant already. So we've had almost 1,000 surveys completed, both hard copies and online. And we continue to receive emails expressing various opinions, some of the memories they have, lots of people joining our email list and really wanting to stay up to date on this project. So we're seeing a lot of interest from the public, which is fantastic. So our schedule of next steps, which is, something that everybody asks me, where do we go now? The Agency Advisory Committee report will be presented to CWC next month. So what that is this is a group of technical experts from the various ministries involved and regulatory authorities. So we sat down over a course of several meetings and developed a list of concerns and opportunities, and really worked through this problem of what these alternatives could look like from a permitting process, from and what kind of impact it may have, the pros and cons of each. So that report will be coming forward. Following that, I will be presenting that same information to EPAC, who of course are keenly involved in this project and interested in it. And then as stated, in October, we'll be having those public information centers to present the alternatives for Springbank Dam, as well as the problem and opportunity statement. People will also have an opportunity at that time to provide some input on that. And then, of course, following that consultation, we'll be bringing a preferred alternative for Springbank Dam to CWC. That's the bulk of my information for tonight. As I said, nothing earth-shattering tonight. Simply keeping you updated, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to field them.
Thank you. I'll go to the committee. Councillor Squire. Oh, you'll have to turn off the mic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was one of those people, Mr. Chair, initially who was concerned about doing one AEA for the entire river, but I feel a little bit better about that given that we're doing it now in 2 phases, and I think that's a good idea because it was incomprehensible to me how you could not think that the decision on the dam was going to have a huge impact on other projects, and I saw it as doing a lot of double work if you were going to look at things you were doing at the Forks and say, well, here's an option if we keep the dam, and here's an option if we don't keep the dam. So I'm very pleased about that, and I hope we're not going to have a debate tonight about how we feel about the dam, because I think we're now entering into the public input session, and I'm certainly going to do my best to keep my mouth shut until we hear from the public, hear what they want, and hear what their thoughts are before I start saying, well, I believe this and I believe that, because I think a lot of work has to be done, including public input. So thank you for that, and I think it's going to be important to find out what the public wants.
Yes, thank you for the the presentation. We'll continue with questions. Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. And along with Councillor Squire, I'm feeling more comfortable about the process as well. So
you and I agree.
We agree. We agree on a lot of things. You'd be surprised. I guess the thing is, my one question, and I spent a lot of time on this issue way back when, and I put forward my report on what I thought was an option, and that was option number 3, which was to convert to a pedestrian bridge, footbridge, and again, there was a second component to it, a walkway on the other side of the river and access up to Riverside Drive. So my thing is that part of my proposal was kept in camera for various reasons. And so I think the thing is that I really feel strongly that, you know, that the public needs to see the full proposal, because from what I'm seeing here in your report, you've got leave it the way it is, fix it, or other. Well, other to me, council did pass a motion to include option number 3 in this process and give it due consideration. So, but if the public isn't clear what option number 3 is in its entirety, then they can't give an opinion. Now, I got good feedback on a conversion, turning into a pedestrian bridge, you know, with many benefits, tourist opportunity. Nobody else has anything like that, you know. And so I don't know if this is still, is this being included? Is the public being made aware that turning into a pedestrian footbridge with access to the other side of the river and all the benefits there and where it could go and so on, are they going to be made aware of that in this process? If anybody can sort of answer that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. So I'll look to staff for, there were other repurposing options. Is this being described as one of them?
Through the chair, from the start of this process and the initial thoughts of having a repurposing option, that was something that we've included within our work plan, and it's a part of the consultant's role as part of this project to explore those options. So just to add to and maybe clarify with what Ashley had mentioned was we have these three categories of options. They're not necessarily, they may look very different depending on which option you choose. For example, the free-flowing river could be, could look at those repurposing option. That was our intent as part of that free-flowing river to look at the repurposing. The reinstate the dam, there's different ways to reinstate a dam, and they have different types of implications as well. So we wanted to look at the categories of the options, and then once we've identified that category and there's an opinion and a recommendation on the category of the options, then we'll go into more detail. But repurposing would be within that free-flowing river option.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we go back one slide, back to your timelines again and put that up on screen? So October of 2017, we're going to do a public information center, look at alternatives, get feedback. What I'm confused about is Q4 of 2017 that you'll be prepared to present preferred alternates to this committee. Our meetings are October 24th, November 21st, and December 4th, and I understand that you need a number of weeks to submit a report. So if you're not wrapping up the public information, I think you literally would have 2 weeks to get a report in for the December 4th meeting. So is that timeline carved in stone? Is that a target? Is it potential that it's not realistic and we're actually looking at Q1 of 2018?
Through the chair, our timeline has been incredibly ambitious since we started this project, and with a lot of kudos to all the people working on this project, and especially the project manager, Ashley Ramalou, we've stayed on target. We do anticipate that we will be able to make that Q4 2017 target, whether that being the November or the December meeting, but that is something that they're really hard dates for us, and we're really trying to meet those dates.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing that back. I was surprised to see that tight of a timeline, so I'll watch for that to come forward at the November or December meeting.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
I was really calm until about 10 minutes ago. And then my blood started to boil. I guess one of the things that drives me a little crazy with respect to my colleague is it's all well and fine to throw out these outlandish ideas, but there's certain parameters along the riverbank.
Excuse me, I'm just going to ask you to maybe rephrase, choose a different word than outlandish for ideas.
Well, I don't have one. Sorry? Okay, I'll go with that one. But I'm the counselor that has to deal with the calls from the private citizens that own the land right down to the ESA, environmentally sensitive area. So when we start talking about building things along that, please, let's let the environmental process complete itself before we keep. And the other thing I take umbrage with, Mr. Chair, to my colleague, is that we are hiding something, that there's something that's not transparent. I'm not even aware of what he's referring to, but this has been one of the most transparent processes, and it needs to be that way, or else the community can't own it. So I was all good, and I was actually going along with with Councillor Squire, and we're not going to debate the issue tonight, and we're all just going to kind of go along, and our staff's got it well in hand. I want to make sure, so I had to say those comments because I know that based on what has been said here tonight, my phone's going to start to ring because of people who are concerned that there's a proposal that we're going to build something basically in their backyard. So that's not on the table at this point. I'm all good if we got to figure out what to do with that monstrosity. It was only $8 million, ladies and gentlemen, that went into building that. And let's not forget, it was $8 million of taxpayers' money, and we got to figure out what we're going to do with it. So let me go to my principal comments, if I may. One of the questions I have is, and I hope we have learned from our BRT experience in terms of communications on this one. Because this is one of those ones that whenever you say dam, usually it goes dam. But whenever you say dam, there's a multitude of emotions. I'll be getting emails tonight about spiny soft-shell turtles, okay? For sure. I'll be slammed all over Twitter tonight because of even contemplating anything other than the decommissioning of the dam. So we need to make sure that there's been a decade of engagement on this issue. And some of those people have become so anesthetized to it that they're not really watching this process. They're not showing up at pop-up things at parks because they see one river, they're thinking about the dam. So that we re-engage all of the groups, all of the people that we have had emails from and letters from and all of those sorts of things. And so we use the broad brushstroke communication methods that we have, but we also use, and I've used the metaphor before, more focused target kind of, so shotgun versus rifle, okay? And we need to use all of those things to make sure that we really engage the community. I've got probably 500 people on my mailing list that are interested in this, this issue, and it's a hot button for Ward 8. I'm sure it'll be a hot button with my colleague, Councillor Hopkins, as it is for the whole city. And when this thing broke, I represented both sides of the river. She got the great part with Springbank Dam or Springbank Park and Storybook Gardens. I get the dam on the other side. So just a few comments. I think the plan's really good. I would rather it be delayed, frankly, to my colleague's point. I'd rather it be delayed to the first quarter of the new year if we can't get it done right. I think it's really important we take our time. We don't blast it through just because we're meeting a timeline. I know you're doing the very best that you can, Mr. Mathers, I really do, but let's make sure we get it right. That's the important thing. And that the community feels like they're owning it.
Thank you. Let's go to the other side of the river now, the wonderful side with wonderful Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. And you're right, I own the side that the public owns and goes into. So I want to thank staff for their report. It is an important topic, not only in my ward, but throughout London. And if, I don't want to get into all the details, but if you allow me just ask a few questions, and I'd like to make a couple comments. And through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, one of the questions I have when it comes to the technical memorandum and those three broad categories that have come up with the do nothing, the free-flowing river, and reinstating the dam. Will the state of the infrastructure or an assessment be done through this process to determine if we could do these three categories? And I guess the other part of that is not only the state of the infrastructure, but also the gates and having that information as we move forward.
So through the chair to the councillor, those items would be looked at during the detailed design section, or the detailed alternatives. So that would certainly go into the plans further down in the master plan EA, so that we can look at the cost implications, the feasibility, all those things. So all those things will come into play, absolutely. We already are aware that there are hydraulics and electronics that likely have to be pulled from that dam, either in the do-nothing case or the free-flowing river, regardless. So we are aware that those issues exist. as well as the gates that are sitting on the bottom of the river can come up frequently as one of those issues as well.
Thank you for that, because that is a question that comes to my mind all the time. When you look at different alternatives, you need to sort of understand, even if it needs repairing, and how it needs to be repaired before you start picking the alternative. So to me, it's a little bit backwards, but I can understand that sooner or later we're going to need the structural assessment of the dam. The other question I have is, I appreciate the timelines are kind of tight, and having that all come about, I'm sure is going to be challenging for staff, but I really do appreciate the work that you are putting into it. The public consultation process, could you sort of explain, one of my colleagues made a comment that it's important that the community needs to own this. And I'd like to know a little bit more of what that public consultation has been and will be.
Sure, through the chair. Public consultation has always been incredibly important from this project from the get-go, in having that terms of reference from the original Springbank Dam public meeting that we had. And this just to link back to what some of the comments that Councillor Hubert had made as well. We've actually went back to that original Springbank Dam meeting that we had that was here till midnight and looked at all the people that contact us as part of that process. We've taken all those comments, and then also we've targeted all those groups, and we're going to have one-on-one conversations with each of those major groups, and we've started that. Ashley's been running that program very, very well, and meeting with them independently. As well, on the other side of it, we have our direct discussions with the public, and that is in the form of the PICs, which we are going to be holding in October. And then as well, we have had these pop-up events to just try to capture, in almost a random fashion, different segments of London's population that may have different interests. So this has always been very important to us. And on top of that, as well as that First Nations engagement and involvement, and we've been successful in reaching out to them as well. And we will be having some engagement with those parties as well as part of this process.
Thank you for that. So this survey, I guess, is what is going to be really important, I guess, to staff to get that feedback from the community. And I have it on my website. I think it's important that the survey go out. One of my, I guess, concerns, and it's just a comment through the questions, and there aren't very many, there's only 10. I guess the concern is, to me, is more that there's maybe something wrong with the river, that it needs to be fixed, and the questions tend to go that way. And I know it's important, and maybe it's difficult to ask questions, but it's also, I think, important to understand that it may not be broken as well. And I just would like to just make that comment. And I know when I do speak to people, I sort of just generally say that the survey needs to be filled out and respond accordingly. I get the emails that they just want to talk about the dam. So what ends up happening is I receive the email and then I just pass it on to staff in regards to the dam. But I understand the process in place and how it moves forward, and looking for more information and at that conversation with the public. Thank you.
Thank you, and Ms. Remelo, I'd like to say how tremendous I think it is that you're taking the initiative to contact the people that have come here to speak about this previously. I think it's very respectful, and I don't think we can really do better in terms of being diligent in our engagement and outreach. Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly appreciate the presentation. Well, you know that. I thought it was very well done and put together. I have a few questions, but I want to make a statement because I have here on my files a discussion that I had with some grade 1 students about the river, not the dam, the river. And I think that they're at Victoria School, they're on Warrencliffe, just close to Oxford. And these kids are grade 1, and they walk the river every Friday morning. So the reason I'm saying that is because I think it would be nice to show them some of this information and get some of their comments, because, you know, they're the ones who are going to live with this in the future. Having said that, I would like to help me out a little bit and go to the page 146 on the presentation. I'm not so sure how to read that with respect to this presentation. I'm talking about timing here, because this tells me, when I read this, it looks as though it's going from May to December of 2018. I don't think that anything in there is 2017. So how do I jump from this fourth quarter 2017 to this diagram? Or maybe you could tell me what this diagram is telling me in comparison to what this presentation that you just made. What I'm getting at here is that you're telling us that in the fourth quarter, you're going to give us a preferred alternative for Springbank Dam. And it seems to me that from that point on, you're going to work with this until the end of the 2018, when you're going to do it. All that time, I thought that you need to do the EA to be able to get this decision that you have here. Help me.
Okay, look to staff for some clarification on the, I believe that's the diagram on the agenda, page 146.
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, the diagram is to outline the immediate steps for phase 2, stage 1. The remainder of the master plan EA is to be completed in 2018, and we expect that final master plan EA report to come towards the end of the second quarter in 2018.
If we could have the mic back.
Yeah, I got it now. Yeah, thank you. I think I'm a little confused with phase 1 and phase 2, because this says phase 1 and phase 2. So what you've shown us here, this has nothing to do with even phase 1. Is this what you're saying? Help me.
Through the chair to councillor, phase 1 is the definition of the problem statement, which we will is also open for public consultation throughout this process as well. Phase 2 is the remainder of the master plan EA, which is then broken into stage 1 and stage 2, which I realize gets a little confusing, with stage 1 being needing to determine what happens to Springbank Dam to be able to move into the rest of it and be able to determine what can be done along the rest of the river, because we need to know those water levels.
So through you, Mr. Chair, you're telling us that by December, I'm assuming fourth quarter December, you're going to decide on a preferred alternative. And then once you give us that, then you're going to begin to work on that alternative throughout 2018 until the end, when you finish something. I think maybe I'm missing this stage, because you have phase 1 and phase 2, but it sounds as though this is only stage 1. So that's probably where I am confused.
Thank you, through the chair. This is a bit of an unusual way to take on an environmental assessment. It was really important to us to put to rest the question of the dam so that we could develop river management strategies that were reflective and respective of that decision. So we're going to be doing basically 3 pieces of the project. The current one that's underway was phase 1, and that is definition of the problem statement. That's coming to an end. Concurrent to that, we've been working on the first stage of the second phase, which will do the environmental assessment activities that are required to provide you good advice about a decision on the dam. The second phase, or stage of phase 2, see, this is tough. P comes before S, that's how I'm trying to remember it. PS, it's phase and stage. The second stage of phase 2 will be developing those specific river management strategies that reflect a decision on the dam and ultimately achieve the long-term stewardship and access and recreational and socio needs that we want for the rivers. So it's going to be a tight process. We have a lot to accomplish, but I do believe we have the right work plan to get that done as the date's shown. This diagram's a bit funny because it reads almost to me like we're in November of 2018 at the end, and we're actually in November of 2017. The entire bar that's shown on 146 is 2017. 2018 is off page to the top of the page.
Okay, well, that's a very helpful piece of information that kind of answers the question, who's on first stage? Councillor, please continue.
Thank you. Okay, I think you just said, so nothing on page 146 is 2018. That's where I was confused, because I thought all this was 2018. That answers, that helps a great deal. So I should have had another line after that star and said 2017, then 2018. I appreciate it very much. And thank you very much for the presentation. I certainly, I want to follow this. All of us want to follow it, and we want the best to come out of this decision. Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I'll go to Councillor Armstrong now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to address some comments that were made earlier about comments I made. And I guess the thing is there was one comment about outlandish idea. The outlandish idea I was referring to in the beginning of the meeting was an option that I had put forward to and brought before council, which council endorsed as option number 3. One of the real options we would look at, and that was repurposing of Springbank Dam. So I didn't think that that was no outlandish idea. Transparency, what I was referring to about in camera is when I brought forward option number 3, there was a component that was kept in camera because it involved potential property issues. And in order for the public to totally understand what option number 3 is all about, I think that part of option number 3 may have to be made public, because you have to look at the full picture to understand what option number 3 is. So my idea isn't outlandish at all, because it's just the idea of repurposing Springbank Dam for a new use. And as part of that, looking at the other side of the dam and the opportunity that could be available once it's repurposed into a pedestrian footbridge. So tomorrow, or even if I can tonight, I'm going to repost my option on my own Facebook so that the public can have an opportunity to look at it, and I'm going to include the full option number 3. Because I know that there was some undertaking, some things that were supposed to be looked into by our staff to do with the in-camera component. I don't think that that's been done. And so a lot of the things that people said they were going to do, I don't think happened because we got into this process. So I think the thing is, I want to make sure that people understand what option number 3 is all about. And in any event, I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands there's, you know, transparent. I'm not questioning the transparency of what our staff is doing in this process at all. It was to do about an in-camera item, and I don't think my idea was outlandish at all. In fact, it's one of the options. Just you haven't gotten specifically into it yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll go to Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. So first of all, I think it's very helpful to have the plan, especially how we're engaging the public, articulated so clearly. I think it's going to be helpful for the members of the public who want to engage to see exactly how there's going to be different decisions along the way and different opportunities to weigh in. I would encourage anybody who's interested in the topic and doesn't want to wait around to a meeting to go to get involved at london.ca and engage online with what the materials that are there. I imagine this report will be there soon. I wanted to talk about the draft evaluation criteria for assessing the Springbank Dam options. That's on page 144 and 145 of the package. I've learned since our orientation to EAs that this is a pretty important part of the whole process, is nailing down what the evaluation criteria are going to be. And I think, first of all, I think we're covering off the wide range of things we ought to be considering. I think this is quite comprehensive. I do think, and I mention this primarily for my colleagues' benefit, that there is sometimes what happens is we get double counting the same thing in terms of evaluating it and then evaluating something that's very, very similar to it. And I just give an example, downtown integration, London plan integration, Thames Valley Parkway corridor plan integration, and then later on under the technical compatibility with existing and planned infrastructure projects. There's a lot of overlap amongst those different criteria. Some of them are the same thing or very similar things. I don't want to change those necessarily, but I do want to talk about one which I think needs to be disaggregated into two different components. And that's under the social, cultural, environment section. The criterion is the stakeholder acceptance. Stakeholder acceptance goes through a pretty broad range of stakeholders, from landowners, members of the public, feedback we're getting. I think that should, I don't want to be exhaustive, but I think it needs to make sure that we're engaging with neighboring municipalities, for example. The river is something we share with them, and I think that's important and can be included under the general rubric of stakeholder acceptance. What I think we should consider changing is that we separate out the First Nations part. The First Nations are not just another stakeholder in the process, and they're quite different and distinct from all the other groups you could put under stakeholder acceptance. And I think that contingent on the First Nations agreeing with that kind of approach, I think I'd rather have stakeholder acceptance as one criterion and then First Nations acceptance as a separate one. We know from the last public meeting that we had that at least one of the First Nations in the area is very clear and wants to make their points very clear to us about what they think about these different options. I think we should formally include that in the EA evaluation criteria because I think that it's an important thing we need to consider along with this other broad range of factors. We've disaggregated a number of things that I think are quite similar in the process, and I think that that's a change we should make to the draft evaluation criteria. If my colleagues agree with that approach, maybe you'll recommend that to council. If you don't, I'll probably bring it up at council.
Thank you. Question to staff. During our public engagement where we would talk to the stakeholders, did you find much representation from our neighbors from the neighboring First Nations communities?
Through the chair, we have been reaching out to our First Nations neighbors and are setting up individual consultation with them. A note on the draft evaluation criteria. We actually had quite a lengthy meeting last week with our consultant during which we went through these, and some of these comments have actually already been addressed, and they will continue to be edited and then brought back to the internal steering committee to ensure that they are balanced and representative of the concerns and that the weighting is appropriate.
Thank you, sir. You're suggesting that these may have been changed slightly. Is the change that Councillor Helmer is requesting one of those? And if it is, then it wouldn't require our committee to take action. Otherwise, I'll look to the committee for that.
Through the chair, some of those ones that he mentioned specifically as being somewhat redundant perhaps were dealt with specifically and in some cases combined or defined better. And yes, the First Nations were also separated.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Helmer, thank you for that. Looking for further comments, Councillor Ushler.
Just quick. Again, I'm not a part of the committee, so I don't have a vote, and I really appreciate the fact to be able to speak here. But I've been part of this project from the beginning, both as part of this committee and as council member. And I don't want to get into a debate about this because I'm not here for that. I'm just here to make a comment. I hear what Councillor Armstrong is saying, and I remember when he came up with the idea. But I have a little concern that he keeps saying that it's option 3. And I think that the options are very clear on this diagram here. What, from my perspective, as a member of the committee of City Council, what Councillor Armstrong's proposal is something that could be taken care of, not as a separate option but as a part of any of the options, particularly the one, well, any of them. So I think it's a separate entity. On an overall notion, it would be part of the end result, but I think we have to be careful that we don't get confused with this option 1, option 2, and option 3 that is here. Because this is
Thank you, Councillor, and I think we can probably just go for a little clarification toward one, but I believe when he was talking about the option 3, that was when we previously discussed it. It was a 3 back then, and that's the answer. She's just referring to an old nomenclature. Fortunately for us, it wasn't phase 1 that it was called. So thank you. So I'm sure staff will have that in there as a possible option. And what we're looking for, and of course, there is simply a footbridge across there, so people have got another access, and then with the potential of connecting somehow to the other side, which. Having lived just across the river, I would have thought would be a tremendous idea myself in those days. So, any final comments? No. All right. Well, we'll look for a motion then to receive the report. Thank you. So that's been moved and seconded. I guess we're approving this. And I'll call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
Okay, thank you. So that takes us to items for direction. There are none. Now we have deferred matters and additional business. So the first one we have there is our deferred matters list. So I'll look to the committee to see if they have any comments on our deferred matters list, or can we receive that? Looks like Councillor Ridley is motioning that she's happy to move receipt on the deferred matters list. And that's been seconded by Councillor Squire. There's no comments, so let's call the question on deferred matters.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
Okay, thank you. I'll look to the committee then for additional business. All right. Seeing none, there was some other items that were brought up in a previous conversation. Am I fine to ask those from the chair? I can offer the chair to the vice, but really it's just a question to staff about the success we might have been having with some of the bollards in the street in order to as a traffic calming measure. So are those doing well enough such that other members of, there's other streets where people are looking for traffic calming, and they're asking for four-way stops and things like that, where something like this might be able to do the trick. So looking for comments from staff if that seems to be an option that might be available in other places.
Thank you to the chair. It is an option that we're pursuing in terms of evaluating its effectiveness. It will have an effect because it does narrow the roadway down and force people to slow down as it goes by. I don't have any statistical evidence on that, but based on experiences across the country. It's become more of a best practice from a traffic calming as a lightweight, I would say, measure in terms of helping slow traffic down. So we are looking at some different signage next year to be rolling out that's a little more robust, and we'll be coming back to council on one of our deferred items actually about new measures for dealing with speeding traffic on local roads as part of Vision Zero.
Thank you very much. So I don't think I need a motion for receipt for that piece of information. I'll be just looking for a motion to adjourn. Oh, I have a comment from Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Just a note of thanks to Mr. Soldo, his staff, Mr. McGuire as well. The traffic calming on Capulet, some of the work we're doing on Beaverbrook that has been installed this week. I've gotten a couple of emails of thanks. It's noticed, and one said it far exceeded her expectation. So not often we hear that, so thank you very much for all of that, and we just hope that it takes and becomes a habit-changing thing.
Well, that's great. If I had a bell, I would ring it, but thank you. So thanks again to staff and for anybody at home that had joined us. And now I'll look for someone to raise their hand for adjournment. Thank you, Councillor Ridley, Deputy Mayor Hubert. And all in favor? There it is, officially closed. Thank you. Have a nice night.